You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy.
All right, Alex, so good to see you on the show. I think when we last spoke, we were just catching up, and I was like, would you ever be interested in joining the Modern People Leader? And you were like, yeah. And I connected you to Daniel, disappeared for 2 weeks to get married. And when I came back, this was in our books. So excited to see this in the calendar. And I'm super excited about the next hour. We have a lot of cool things to talk about, and you offer a lot on all things HR. So super excited. How are you doing today? It's Friday.
I'm good. No, it's great. It's Friday, and it's Friday afternoon here in New York City. So, just a few more things after this one, and then the weekend gets going.
Is the heat bearable? So we have an event coming up in New York, and I was on a call just checking in with one of our local champions, and they were talking about how hot and miserable it is. And I was like, I lived in Manhattan for 5 years, so I remember those nasty hot summer days.
Yeah. Today is a particularly brutal one. Honestly, I feel like we've had a pretty lovely summer. We've had a few scary days. I don't want to scoop my good news thing. I was going to tell you what I'm doing this weekend.
Let's go into that. Let's just good news. You know what it is. Our audience knows what it is. We like to kick off with our guests, so here we are.
It's my nephew's first birthday tomorrow, and so my daughters are just very excited and ready for, we've spent a lot of time guessing what kind of cake it will be and picking out the presents. But I was going to say, I'm anxiously looking at the weather forecast because it's a pool party out at his grandparents' house. And we're like, okay, this heat wave is supposed to break by tomorrow. So we think it actually can be outside in a safe and healthy way for all the young children that are going to be attending. But we're really excited about that. So yeah, it's hot here today, but tomorrow I think it's supposed to recalibrate back to something healthy and humane.
Daniel, you want to go?
Yeah, I can go next. So with any event that you put on, there are 100 details that you have to work out, once you start planning. And we've gotten a lot better about planning ahead. I think for MPL Live Austin, it all came together in maybe a month. And I'm probably exaggerating here, but it felt like everything came together within 30 days. With MPL Live Boston, we got, a little bit more ahead, probably a month and a half. This time around, I think for MPL Live New York City, which is coming up in September, we started in mid-June, so 3 months ahead. And yesterday, or actually earlier today, we secured our final speaker for the panel. And so it's going to be Melanie Rosenwasser from Dropbox, Angela Lemathon, I'm probably saying her name wrong, who's the former VP of People Data and Analytics at GSK. And then today, Chelsea Caden from Warby Parker gave us a yes. So
you want a fun fact? I could wave right now at Chelsea. We live directly across the street from each other, and we used to both have companies in the same building because I was at Flatiron Health and Warby Parker, and we have this share building in Soho. And then she moved directly across the street. So sometimes when we do Zoom calls or something, we will wave or try to come up in the neighborhood. So there you go. You actually did get the same weather that I am experiencing right now if you talk to Chelsea.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's phenomenal. Awesome. She's really a phenomenal leader.
That's great news. Is anything else to add to that, Daniel?
No. Nothing else to add. I felt like that deserved its own good news.
That does deserve its own good news. I've had a lot of big good news to share lately. My good news this week, it was my first full week back in the swing of things. I was out for 2 weeks for the wedding. Daniel was very gracious and, gave me a day or two to kind of transition back. And it's been awesome. It's been an awesome week. We've gotten a lot done, a lot on the MPL front. Daniel mentioned MPL Live New York City. But there's just so much. We're also preparing for HR Tech, and we have some cool client work we're doing at HR Tech. And it's just, the conference season, it's big for us because that's how we do our sales. I also have been, had some time to get some personal projects over the finish line, one of which is my own personal website. So everyone that has listened to my vibe coding obsession finally culminated with me launching my personal website, which just like a lot of it is MPL and gets you to MPL podcasts and resources. But it also has some other things that I'm increasingly focused on and obsessed about, including vibe coding and, how AI is going to transform the workplace. That's going to be a large part of what we talk about today. So, my good news is like on multiple kind of work fronts. It's been a great week, and I'm looking forward to like literally just chilling out this weekend. Daniel noticed in my calendar that we're going to the Balloon Museum. I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently
It's so cool.
Is it?
No, it's not. It's like actually way more intelligent than you might expect it to be. It's really, really clever.
Oh my God. We had never even heard of it. And an old furniture store that's like not like a half mile, maybe a mile away, has turned into a balloon museum. So we're checking that out this weekend. So all in all, I just, regular good news this week or today. And, I'm super excited, Alex, for the next question, which I call the Brene Brown question. What's your story? You've had a really interesting career in HR. You've traversed a lot of different brands and you've done a lot of different things. You're super connected. You're apparently neighbors with Chelsea at Warby Parker. So tell us your story, the ups and downs, twists and turns.
I got laid off in November 2022, and I just remember having so many mixed emotions. I was sad, I was embarrassed, but I was also relieved. One moment asking my wife if I should quit my job and try to make MPL work, and the next day that decision's being made for me. And I'm lucky. Most people don't have a passion project to fall back on like the MPL. And it's terrifying and confusing trying to navigate your next steps after something like a layoff. And honestly, the outplacement services that were offered to me at the time felt pretty underwhelming. They didn't seem like they'd actually help. And I just remember feeling frustrated and a little bit bummed. I thought about asking for more support, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I realized that the leaders managing the process were just as overwhelmed and frustrated as I was. They were being asked to do more with less. They were handling these layoffs with little support or guidance, all while trying to protect the company's culture and take care of their people. And so that's why Career Sandwich's mission really hit home for me when I met them. It's not just another outplacement service. It's holistic transition support that helps both individuals and the people leaders who support them, giving everyone a little bit of peace of mind during a really crazy time like a layoff. And they do more than just help your alumni brush up on their resume. They help them tell their story, from figuring out who they are to defining where they want to go next. Career Sandwich helps them craft a narrative that really makes sense of the journey, and their platform is pretty sick. There's one-on-one coaching, there's group workshops, there's on-demand resources that are designed to help alumni really articulate their value, the story, and feel a little bit more confident about their next steps in a time that feels very uncertain. And so if you're an HR leader that's having to part ways with people from your team and need support, making this process as least crappy as it can possibly be, then I highly recommend checking out Career Sandwich. If you want to get in contact with their team, go to careersandwich.com/MPL. That's careersandwich.com/MPL.
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and up until kind of senior year of college, plan was to be an actress. And what that meant was that I spent my summers and like other kind of extracurricular hours doing lots of prep by investing in sort of a food service career. So lots of like barista, waitress, hostess. I was really trying to prepare myself for what life would look like. And I got, sort of like this panic senior year of like, okay, this is like the moment that it's really going to happen. And I'm going to have to move to New York City with no health insurance and like try to wait tables and like see if maybe I'll even get an audition that maybe will one day get me a job. And I decided to apply for this like new grad program that Google was having. This was like a few years after the IPO, and Google was just looking for people who had general interest and aptitude in coming to do things, and they were going to kind of help sort through where they would land in the organization. Really fortunate to get like this kind of Google new grad offer and to sort of make this huge like swing away from like this life that I had kind of planned and been planning for, move to San Francisco and show up like in people operations in this moment that will always be really foundational for me, where Google was really, I think, pioneering sort of what a human-centered workplace was, and this idea that the best ideas come from like specific individuals, and your job is to kind of like nurture and help them work as effectively as possible so you get that idea out of them. And then I got to spend almost 8 years at Google, kind of growing in the HR business partner and manager and management track. Really just like courtside seat to this company going through tremendous kind of transformation, like the 10,000 to 60,000 curve, and so much change in the business and just the way that like technology was being delivered, and to drive a lot of that change, my clients and customers. I mean, it was just so much fun.
Were these like in the Laszlo Bach years?
This was the Laszlo Bach era, yeah.
Okay.
So Laszlo, I think, set like probably the most foundational tone for most of our sort of people operations like ethos, as I know you know. And I think it was a really special time for sure.
And sorry, I feel like I interrupted your story.
Wow.
So
No,
like
you're
pick up from Google.
People from Google. Okay, so then I
flow.
met the co-founders of Flatiron Health. Their first company was acquired by Google, and then their second company, Flatiron Health, was meant to sort of look at the data that was available in medical records and use it to accelerate cancer research in regulatory settings. So like very big, audacious, mission-centered work. And they were sort of closing in on a Series C and about to go through like their hyper growth curve when I joined the organization. And just again, like had this really like exciting moment of like velocity in the company and in my own career. We got to grow and scale the company from 200 to 2,500, drive through an acquisition, and just really for me learn a lot about how you take a lot of those principles that I learned, but also apply it in these moments of like change within an organization. And just really powerful, meaningful work. And then I was tired, like really tired. And so I hired my successor before I gave birth to my second daughter. And I went out on maternity leave with no clue what I was going to do next, which is, not something I do typically. And then I met with like founders and just started like talking to people. This was early 2023. Just started talking to people about kind of what jobs were out there. And I like to say that in this span of a few months, like all these CEOs were started going from like the RTO conversation right into the AI conversation. And I felt so unequipped to have that AI conversation. They all wanted to kind of ask me what existential changes were going to happen to how work gets done. And this is about 3-4 months after ChatGPT is released. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I have yet to grapple with these conversations at all. I haven't really thought about it. And so when the co-founders of Jasper reached out, and they were sort of one of those pioneering AI native tech stacks, I thought, okay, well, at least from this standpoint, I will get to learn from the inside out, learn from our customers and from our employees what the heck this technology transformation is going to look like. And now it's 2 years later. So here we are.
Yeah, Jasper, y'all were like the OG. I think we talked about this in the prep call. Y'all were like the first, Gen AI marketing tool that went to market. At the time, I think I was a member of Exit 5, which is this big community for B2B marketers. And I remember, I think Dave must have had either the CEO on the podcast or maybe there was an ad or it was in the newsletter. I honestly don't remember how I came across Jasper, but I remember at the time thinking like, oh shit, like Jasper, like they're way ahead of everybody else. So I have a general understanding of what Jasper does, but for the strangers that, I mean, I guess now it's a lot easier to describe, but how do you describe what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, so Jasper is AI native marketing tech platform. It's a generative AI company that's purpose built for marketers. So what that means in practice is you're looking at solving some of the same problems and challenges that marketers have every day, but with sort of the power of AI. So many marketers are struggling with, how do I deliver content at scale while staying like on brand and personalizing to audiences? And that there's just a very different mindset for how you can solve some of those problems when you're using and harnessing kind of the capabilities of AI. So that's like the short version. And give you the long one later.
Yeah, I haven't.
I was trying to sign you up. I was trying to sign you up as a customer on the prep call. So
Well, we're your ICP. I can tell you, like, I don't even know fully what Jasper does, but I know that we're ICP because.
And we're thinking about it, by the way. I brought it up to Regina, who handles this
Well,
stuff. Sorry, Steve.
In the early, so MPL, fun fact about modern people leaders, we started recording podcasts in 2020. And so this December will be 5 years. Am I doing my math right, Daniel? 5 full years. And we, for the first, 2 years, it was largely just us recording Zoom recordings and publishing those through a lot of like painstaking work that Daniel personally did to get these episodes published. And when I knew I was going to sell my company and, Daniel, there were changes, at Daniel, where Daniel was working, he decided to go full time in a modern people leader. I think our first go to market like effort went live in March 2023, which also coincided with ChatGPT hitting. And so a lot of, so we had the benefit of like building the business when, LLMs were being, made available. And so we were early adopters. And, back then it was like, well, what do these tools look like? Should I invest, a ton of money? We did a lot of bootstrappy kinds of things. And one of the things is we worked with a partner to develop like this custom tool we use. And it's great. Daniel and the content team use it all the time. And like 3 months ago, I commented on your company's post. I'm pretty sure you didn't see it, Alex, but I was like, Daniel, I think Jasper does like everything our tool does. And then like 20 additional use cases on top of that. So I know this isn't a product podcast, although, it probably feels like it lately because we talk about these tools so much, but I, definitely am excited also to learn more about what y'all do.
Also, one story, just to show how far these tools have come, around this time, we started playing around with ChatGPT to do things like write blogs from transcripts. Mm-hmm. And back then
it was impossible.
Just like it was impossible. And so now to see companies like Jasper that have like figured out how to scale the entire content side, it's pretty mind-blowing. Like for me, the hardest part is like, how do you learn a new tool like Jasper and like move your entire process over to that? But I know a lot of companies are doing it. That's been like, it's more of like a time thing for me.
So it sounds like we need to meet your best AE over at Jasper.
We Alex. Do. Yeah.
But yes, I will get on. But no, it's very apropos of the conversation that we're going to have. I mean, I think the adoption to transformation curve is basically the heart of, I think, what we grapple with it just the same way internally as what we discuss from a customer standpoint externally.
Yeah. It must be like a bizarro world, like, experience that on the commercial side because you're in all those kind of good, those client-facing conversations, and you're dealing with the similar but different challenges within HR. And to your point, that's what we want to talk about today. And I'm just going to dive in because there's a lot that we want to cover. And you mentioned in our prep call being less energized. I just like, this really struck me in the prep call notes, less energized by AI in HR and more about how AI is reshaping organizational design across the business. And I know that that's like a nuance there, and you're not saying you're not excited and pumped about, how AI could be used in HR. But it is like a reframe. And I think it's a really important one, because the scope of the conversations that sometimes I get frustrated with, LinkedIn, with conversations on this topic, because it's like, y'all, this doesn't stop at HR. Like, that's where like the work you could argue is just going to begin. We're going to have to repeat this in client success. We're going to have to repeat this and say it. Like, there will be no part of a company that will be left untouched by AI. And so I love that comment, like, how is AI reshaping organizational design across the business? And so I have my own.
Can I push you? Can I push you on something, Stephen?
Yeah, please.
You just said it doesn't. It begins with us, but I don't think that it hasn't begun in other places. I think part of where I'm like provocative is that I think that conversation is occurring in every department, right? Good. I know, because I'm selling into one of those departments. So I get to hear and see the conversations they're having. And I see it across the organization in different pockets and places. I think as HR leaders, we can choose to be a part of driving that across our organizations and participating in the conversations that are unequivocally already occurring. Or we can stay overly focused on our own use cases and our own applications of it. And then we will miss those conversations, and like the decentralized nature of sort of that kind of adoption will mean that everyone is doing it a little bit differently and thinking about it in different ways. So most of my provocation is like, see your organization as one of many organizations that is going through this, and figure out how to level yourself up so you're looking across the organization to see what's playing out, and you're figuring out if you want to be sort of human-centered and AI-powered at the same time. You need to figure out how to own that conversation at the organizational level and across all functions, instead of staying within your lane.
This is so refreshing. And, I hopefully this is permission. You're granting permission to not tow around kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room that is, generative AI and just AI in general. But I'll speak for myself. I have been accused of other HR leaders as not being, truly plugged into what's happening in HR, because I am not an HR practitioner. And I have had lengthy live debates with people who have made these accusations. And it's like, we're hearing, like, I get your point, and I am sensitive to that point. And Daniel and I, it's like a tireless, it's a grueling exercise to make sure that we're including as many voices as we can in these conversations. But, I agree with you. And so, this is bigger than HR, and we play, I believe, an important role in all this, but like, we got to expand the way we're thinking. And so that's where I want to start. And so, like, walk us through, the catalyst that really expanded your mind on this, when you were like, oh shit, this is, I've been thinking at this, in this really specific way. This is much bigger than that. Because I feel like all of us that are passionate about this have had that kind of moment. And so I'm curious, when did you have it? And like, what is now your current view on what's happening right now in the workplace?
I mean, honestly, I think when I first started using it as an individual, that's when I started to understand some of the power. So like, I think I was like interviewing at Jasper and like playing around on it. And I built this like ChatGPT workflow that took like the PDFs that my kids' school sent out and transformed them into Google Calendar invites. So I didn't have to like put all the like theme days and school closures, so many school closures, onto like our shared family Google Calendar. And it was like, I guess it was my first workflow. And that like understanding of like, oh, this isn't just like the chat, like interactivity. This is actually like a workflow component. And this is before it could even make an actual CSV. I just asked it to form it at like a CSV, and then I copied it into a CSV and put it into Google Calendar. But I started to like kind of get my wheels turning about how much work was going to change and evolve if you could actually start to automate, provide that level of automation into workflows, and into the logic inherent in workflows. And then when I showed up at Jasper and the company was just making the move into that enterprise space and looking at a very different type of purchasing pattern than where the sort of original ICP was, that's when you could start to act. I could actually have this like courtside seat to watch how the adoption was playing out in organizations. And those organizations, because our customers are marketers, were not HR. And so I was so curious to see like, well, what's changing about the topography of the teams, and how are they redesigning their roles and responsibilities And gosh, isn't that going to be the exact same for me and my own organization? And how do we think about that within our own marketing team? And then like correspondingly, like across the org, you're always having all these like organizational design conversations when you're growing really rapidly. So like the desire to ask those questions just started to emerge within me.
So I think of the news from Microsoft CEO this week. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was some quote about, success and how it's not linear. He he's a very articulate guy. I can't remember exactly what he said. He made the layoff sound like it was positive, but they had to lay off a big portion of their workforce while they're also having like record quarters and thriving as a business. And this seems to be the new norm going forward. And so for a company like Jasper that's always been AI native and isn't having to like, trim the fat, I don't know how, it's probably a bad way of referring to it, but
the enigma
being really lean.
The enigma of success, I think, is what he called it. This is the enigma of success.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you're, starting to have these conversations across the organization with the marketing leaders, with the CS leaders about like what like the new, team structure looks like going forward. Have y'all made like what's the progress on that? Like what are some of the thoughts that are emerging across the leadership team?
No, first of all, I consider it to be like a very fortunate thing to be growing and building alongside this technology. And I think that there are a different set of principles that come with having to adopt this technology into like an existing structure. I've been trying to learn more about them, and I have some like, thoughts and opinions, but I think within Jasper and what I get to see every single day, it does feel very meaningfully different. To think about that as a part of our growth plan, as a part of our talent strategy, and to really be thoughtful and intentional on how those things occur in a very complementary way. So I don't take that for granted. I think, what we decided to do sort of like a set of like principles based, like, sort of, theoretical starting points that then give us some frameworks for how we're making decisions. So things like efficiency creates possibility, which is sort of talking about how really the goal of offloading a set of projects and work streams to technology is to free people up to do a different set of work. And so we actually as leaders need to define what that different set of work is. We need to help people get comfortable with what it means to do that work. Because one of the realities that I've experienced even within my own team is that there's something very comforting about the things you know how to do well, and people lose some of the like validation and kind of dopamine bump of doing the things that they like feel very familiar, even if they are kind of like more transactional. And so that efficiency creates possibility is like, it's our job to paint the picture of what is now newly possible and what types of exciting things we're going to go off and achieve in exchange for people giving up those like parts of their daily jobs that may have just been core to how they were spending their time in the past.
Do you sometimes, does it concern you that, because I believe that there's going to be a tremendous reskilling or upskilling of, a large portion of the white collar workforce. Does that keep you up at all at night? Like because the things you're talking about, I love the notion that we all have these like comfort processes that we operate in, that we've grown accustomed to. I think as an entrepreneur, like Daniel and I have examples of that in sales, in marketing, in, insert the function of the business.
And that was part of my point earlier. It's like, you're comfortable with something, it's hard to make a big switch.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
sorry, Stephen.
No, you're right. And I guess sometimes that doesn't seem to be part of the conversation that's happening on LinkedIn and other kind of platforms right now. Like there are people talking about it, but it still feels like there is some tiptoeing around that because there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like people are avoiding the fact that this technology will impact jobs. I believe that to be true in my heart of hearts. Like I think it's going to change jobs, and I think it's going to create jobs. So I don't think it's a net negative, but it is going to require, it's required me at 49 to like really invest a lot of time and energy. And, we're entrepreneurs, so we kind of control our workload. And I just wonder, like, how is that? What is that going to look like for an entire company that has to go through a similar journey?
We've had a lot of chief people officers come onto the show, and if there's one thing that they have in common, it's that they run their org their way. I think of people like Crystal Boyson at Sprout Social, who completely rethought performance reviews for her company, ditched long form questions, created 3 clear ratings, which they then can auto calculate into a final rating. I think of Carmel Galvin from Klaviyo, who ditched the generic way of measuring quality of hire and built a custom framework tailored to each team. I think of Jessica Zvan, who tracks LTV to ECAC to evaluate every single manager. Like, these are the exact kinds of people leaders who wish they had a tool like ChartHop. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ChartHop, ChartHop is a flexible people ops platform and HRIS that brings in all of your people and business data into one place. So think, HRIS plus having the ability to bring in data from places like Salesforce. And they let you customize key processes like headcount planning, compensation, performance, and engagement exactly the way that you want it. No rigid templates, no one-size-fits-all playbook, just the flexibility to build the systems that you truly believe in. With ChartHop, you can really run your org your way. If their platform sounds like something that you want to learn more about, I highly recommend that you go request a demo. Just go to charthop.com and make sure to let them know that we sent you.
Did I give you my analogy about an induced demand when we were talking about this before?
No.
Okay, I'm going to just give you literally the thought process my brain goes through when I hear you talk. So the principle of induced demand is one of my favorite ways to think about behavioral evolution. So induced demand is sometimes more comfortably known as more roads equals more traffic, which is to say when an urban planner is designing a city, there used to be a theory before we were studying traffic patterns at scale that if you added a road, you would basically take the same number of cars and distribute them across a new road and the traffic would go down. So no problem. Everybody can get to where they're going even faster. Let's just keep adding roads. When they actually studied kind of the impact of changing traffic patterns, what they found is that there was more traffic every time they added a new road, which is to say people actually changed their behavior. People got on the road that were not previously driving because of the addition of the new road. And why did they do that? I think the premise is that we were undercounting for how much people's decision-making framework is actually going to shift as the result of new information. And so that's where I see from an AI kind of changing how we work. I think we are undercounting the extent to which people are going to start to adapt and evolve how they are working because of this new technology. And we're assuming there's the same amount of work just redistributed against fewer people. But then you ask the question of well, how do people learn what they need to learn or know what they need to know or have the exposure, both from a pure AI literacy standpoint or from a broader reskilling standpoint. And I think what's really interesting is this is very different technology than a lot of other enterprise technology. It gets integrated at a much more cellular level and individual level than where you see kind of big enterprise technology of more recent decades. Everybody who's gone through a Workday transition might think about how the extent of a Workday transition is a lot of norming to a system's way of doing things rather than that system understanding your way of doing things and adapting and changing. But that's what AI is really doing. It needs to be integrated in at that kind of workflow level. Even if it's a team workflow, it doesn't have to necessarily be an individual, but you see the biggest outcomes when you actually really go in and embed and understand the way a team is working and build the custom services and solutions and sort of think through how to enable those traffic patterns. So I think some organizations are going to probably invest a ton of money and time and energy in going in and doing that workflow mapping, and then employees will get reskilled through that process because they'll have exposure to new technology. But I think for a lot of people, and this is why I don't want people leaders to like wait around wondering when this will happen, it's like a very self-serve, like, sort of what you were describing to me, Stephen, like, oh my God, I went in there and I started building and I was like shocked to see what was possible. And I think that's part of why we have to start having that conversation, because I think people aren't going to wait for us as organizations to be ready to reskill them. Like that behavioral change is starting already. Those like traffic patterns are shifting. And so they're not going to wait for us to go in some like tops down, like formal curriculum and approach, much as some of us are trying as hard as we can to like define literacy and figure out how to test and evaluate for it. It's going to happen like alongside that.
Yeah, and I think, I love that. I love that. And Daniel, we have our offline async doc that we're managing to in these conversations. And as soon as I saw Daniel Wright about to be a fire clip, I was like, yep, sure is.
You induced the man.
Yeah, and I think to add to that before we quickly move on is that a unique part of this technological shift is the technology itself has the capability to train you. So learning to vibe coding isn't what I thought it would be. I didn't realize that it would literally be like a real-time education as I'm trying to do the next step. It's coaching me. It's telling me if I did something wrong, I'm sharing that back. And it's like, oh yeah, Stephen, you should have done it this way. Try again. It's given. So it's.
Oh, I'll give you a tip. If it breaks, ask it why it broke. And then once it tells you that, ask it how it will never happen again. Like I mean, it's next token prediction, so it's not actual cognitive understanding, but it can kind of introspect what went wrong faster than you will be able to debug what went wrong on your own.
1,000. Like, I don't know, Daniel, if that's been your experience, but I agree.
That has definitely been my experience. Or like taking a screenshot of the bug you're getting and like feeding it back into the system. And then it's like, all right, let me try to fix it. And then if it still doesn't work, then screenshot from V0 and put it into ChatGPT and say like, hey, I'm getting this error. Like, what can I do?
Yeah.
Doesn't it make you
crazy.
realize how like underlying systemic and like the patterns and everything we do, because it's really just predicting like the next token, like the next logical thing from the thing you just did. And isn't it, I find it really exciting when you think about just like how many underlying patterns are just already present in everything we're doing.
Well, and I'll get us back in track here shortly, but I have noticed a difference. Like the LLMs are smarter and seem to know more about certain software programs, the functionality, the navigation, the troubleshooting than others.
They're learning from us. We're going in there and asking it for help, and then it's building like a deep, like the reinforcement learning curve. It's like learning from what we're asking it, and then if we're all asking it for the same types of things, it's like, well, I got that answer already.
And there's one platform I'm using right now. I won't call it out because I love the platform, but the vibe coding troubleshooting doesn't work as well with this particular platform as it does with other platforms. And I'm like, I want to send that CEO feedback. Like, you've got to fix this. Needs to be a top priority for you. But anyhow, continuing the conversation, there's another word that jumped out at me, from the prep notes, and that was experimentation. And it sounds like experiments is something that you have leveraged. I think that's a commonality with any company that has been that kind of leading the charge on using Gen AI. Can you give us like a behind the curtain view on what some of the experiments you've run at Jasper and how that has led to a prediction you have about the future of the workplace?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I think I can't remember if this was right before we started recording, but we were talking about the questions, and we were basically saying like, what my expertise was 2 weeks ago might feel radically different than it is now, because just the pace of technical change. And so that's for me where like experimentation becomes incredibly critical. We are talking about something that we can't wait to learn when it is in like a codified learning standpoint. Because it's happening faster, I think, than people can write up the documentation of how to learn it. And so I think for my team in particular, we were driving a bunch of conversations across the organization, because that like I said, is sort of where my leaning is. And then I actually had to kind of like call a little bit of a code red recently and say, like, I don't actually think we're doing enough ourselves to experiment. Like, I feel like we're off trying to facilitate experimentation and think through how to start the right conversations with managers about their organizational structure, but we're not doing enough as a team. And so we started like looking at what the teams that we were supporting were doing really well. And one of the places that we noticed things were going like particularly well is that our EPD team was starting to really like redesign some of the flow state of how they work through sort of rapid prototyping, and in particular, seeing designers bring some of their ideas to life and sort of actually give people like a visual sense of what, or sort of a real world sense of what they were looking to build. And then having that be not immediately pushed into production, but become more of like this iterative prototyping motion of product development versus a PRD. And so we decided to do something like that on the people team. And we were like, we need to just kind of like build prototypes and start to get some of those things more quickly kind of into the learning standpoint. A lot of it is around just like, how do we think about knowledge management as a team? Like, questions that grapple all people teams. Were you going to ask me something, Daniel?
Well, I immediately wanted to know more about these prototypes.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, first of all, this is probably like the not quite like vibe coding, more like vibe, like more like true coding tools, but you can actually build pretty quickly working prototypes of like attached to your company's code base. You can build pretty quickly working prototypes of new features. And so a designer, instead of having to mock up a visual of what it is that they're trying to do, can actually show a product and engineering team what that would actually look like in practice. And then, maybe we're like, we don't like it, but like very little time has been invested in getting from like quickly to a proof of concept to get feedback to iterate on it. And then we can move on to the next really, really much faster.
And then on the people team, what are some of the early prototypes you're building?
I mean, honestly, probably like things that seem like commonplace to individuals, but I'm just trying to think through how to engage from a learning and development standpoint with very limited resources. So I'm like, how do I build, the right learning frameworks very quickly and see what's working? Do I engage people through podcasts that are generated through Notebook LM? Do I engage them through lovable sites that give them interactive learning and development experiences? And how do I sort of fail quickly? How do I get something up there? How do I get feedback on it? If no one's listening to the podcast, like, then even the time that's spent sort of like designing that structure doesn't feel worth it. Actually, podcasts have probably been one of the more successful prototypes that we've put out there. I think people are more willing to listen to things sometimes than go to like a intranet page. But we started this weekly meeting on the team called PAIN, lowercase p, capital AI, lowercase n. And it is when we talk about all the things that are not working and we are failing together. And most of it is, and I will say this as a generative AI tool, it's like places that the marketing of a tool might not actually match the lived reality of using the tool. But it's also a place to kind of time box the experimentation and the failure into a bit of a space where it's now incorporated into our collective consciousness as a team. We have learned from it. We have, like, if somebody's filed the support ticket and gotten a response back, like, we've gotten that answer into our collective understanding as well, but we're moving on and moving faster through it. And so that was good too, because now I'm going to bring that back to the rest of the company and be like, you guys all need your pain groups too. They're very cathartic.
So real quick follow-up question to that. One of the things that I'm getting asked a lot in comments to my posts, DMs, whenever I post about Gen AI and HR is like, how do you unblock the org to allow you to actually do things like prototype? I think, we are a startup, and we are the co-founders that are like committed to this. So it's very easy for Daniel and I to kind of mobilize our teams to do this. We don't have, there's no kind of sunken costs issues. There's no that kind of company debt holding us back. And so I'm curious, what that partnership has looked like at Jasper in terms of HR being able to build their own tools?
Well, I think that a lot of this comes from really effective collaboration with your security and legal teams. I am blessed with probably the most progressive, wonderful partnering security and legal teams who are much more like figuring out a way to like say yes first and like help me figure out how we get to that yes versus say no and like push me to fight back from that. So I think, your executive team is one thing, but like the corporate stakeholders that you're going to work with and work through, I think are really critical partners. Finance as well, from just like I haven't done this yet, but like I've played around with the idea of doing some sort of like budget where it's like a fungible headcount tool budget where you can actually get more money if you use it for tools versus for headcount, just to encourage the experimentation. But I think you have to start with like, you have to start with what your company's tolerance is for experimentation and how do you create the environment for experimentation. And then you should know that people are using these tools kind of regardless of whether or not you've fully approved them. So you should decide what level of like guardrails and understanding of those use cases you want knowledge of, and therefore somewhat amount of like control and protection over. But I think, across the organization, what I see is that it's really about how you set your goals as your organization and what behaviors you're celebrating in achieving those goals. Because I think that at some point we're all going to start setting goals that can only be achieved through the use of AI. And that's what I see like from the most progressive organizations around this is like, these are not like attainable things unless you actually have access to kind of the infinite knowledge and sort of rapid iteration that the technology provides.
Yeah, I agree. I know we only have 9 minutes left, and so I wanted to make sure that I squeeze this question in. So, like when I think about my career, probably like one of the most impactful experiences for me was starting my career as an intern, actually working for Steven at Workify. I ended up staying there for 5 years, and I got to learn how to do a lot of different things. And I had some great mentors that I worked with. But the work that I was doing was highly manual. I was like building lists for sales. I was doing personalized like outreach to set up like discovery calls. I was creating marketing decks. I was like manually going in and making changes to like paid search campaigns. And I feel like that's the type of work that a lot of entry level employees have been doing for the last 15, 20, 25 years, at least since we've had access to some of these digital tools. And so I feel like, the immediate reaction from people is like, oh, we just don't need entry level employees anymore. And we briefly talked about this in our prep call. You were saying that you initially thought that, but then, since then you started to uh, maybe challenge that initial, thesis that you had. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
how is Jasper? Sorry, you already have some thoughts.
No, I was going to say, like, I think what I have formed up in my head is that, like, early career jobs might be changing or maybe one day going away, but early career talent is still there. Like,
Yeah.
And what we're totally underestimating, I think, in the headlines about what's going to happen to early career jobs is that this early career talent is growing up in this new paradigm of how work is getting done in a way that will radically transform their capabilities to apply and adopt this technology. And therefore, our responsibility is to shift our training and mentorship to the type of like judgment and critical thinking and problem solving that some of us didn't get access to until later in our careers. Like we shift that like division of labor because I think a lot of us felt like we were learning that through sort of like slogging through and doing. And now we have the ability to get individuals who are able to bring a ton of reverse mentorship around how work can get done, but they need like the support and partnership from us and from their academic institutions to think through what that looks like. But I think it's interesting because I had this like conversation. I had this conversation with my parents. They like listened to one of my podcasts, and then they were talking about this. I can't believe I told another podcast audience this. But I was talking about how, you know, when the internet, when search engines first started to kind of become available, and I had like stopped going to the library as much to do research, and I could do research on a computer. There was like some back and forth conversation at home of like, are you really learning if you have like this infinite knowledge at your fingertips on the internet? And I had told the story of like, you know, what that conversation looked like. And somebody had shared with me that when sort of writing was first introduced, a lot of the Greek philosophers and Plato in particular felt like it was going to destroy memory. Like we will never be able to remember anything anymore now that that writing is introduced, and was sort of against like the earliest versions of literacy because it was going to atrophy people's brains away from like true cognitive and intellectual discourse. So that goes to say like I think this is an age-old conversation. I'm honestly really excited to learn from early career talent, even if they're not doing sort of the early career jobs that I did, because I actually think that we're going to create something that's even more exciting as sort of this next generation comes into the workplace.
I mean, yeah, I had the same exact conversation with my in-laws, and my argument was that our brains aren't going to atrophy because we're able to just do so much more in any given day, and like you're getting more reps of any one thing. So like if before it took you, you know, 3 hours to write 2 or 3 social posts, and now you can do, you know, 10 times the amount of posts, your brain starts to recognize those patterns, and you're able to like, you know, get to the end result much faster because you're able to, you know, figure out that like there should be line breaks between every line in your social post, that, you know, the hashtag should look a certain way. Like the more times you see it, the better you are at
Yeah.
producing it.
Well, but it heightens our responsibility to give that level of feedback. Like you used to kind of be lazy about giving feedback. Sometimes you could like look at something really quickly and be like, yeah, that's probably good. Like they wouldn't have gotten there if it wasn't good enough. Now you can't look at it really quickly because somebody else probably did like the leg up. You have to actually be able to give feedback and teach those learnings. And I think that just puts a different burden on where that pattern recognition has to originate.
So I want to ask one more question. It's a building off of the last question that Daniel asked, and you know, I'm a big soccer fan, football, and what the rest of the world calls football, and my team is shifting from a 4-3-3 attacking style to a 4-2-3-1, and so this isn't about soccer, so don't worry. But if we apply kind of that kind of tactical shift, and you know, with the former being kind of where we are today, what team structures look like today, and the latter being like where we're going, I'm curious. I agree with your earlier comment that I don't think new to career or early career employee, we're going to see less of the new to career and early career employees. I think it's actually going to be quite the opposite, because my belief is they're going to have the advantage of having used these technologies more, because they're going to use it for their schoolwork. They're going to use it. My daughters are using it for everything. And so if it's not, so how do we think that recalibration of the workforce will look like? You know, what will be the new structure? Do you have any kind of thoughts or ideas there?
I don't know. The model that we've been like experimenting with is like, instead of a pyramid, it looks sort of more like an oblong shape, which is to say you need like equal proportions of the levels. You don't need like as many kind of like historically like junior tactical roles supporting more people doing really like intellectual work, supporting more people doing broader and strategic work. And so like the idea is that you have more like equally proportioned, really nimble units and teams that sort of can form and reform in different structures. I don't know if we're there yet as humans to actually be able to put that into practice, but that's what I've like seen just starting to emerge from our organizational charts.
Well, I think we have to move to rapid fire questions, unfortunately. I feel like both Steven and I's wheels were turning. It's like, should we ask another question?
Yeah.
I know that's what I was thinking. Okay, so rapid fire questions. We ask the same exact questions to every guest, and yeah, we try to get through them as quickly as possible. So, question one: what's one piece of advice that you'd give to somebody that's starting in HR today?
Don't be a decorative plant. It's the best thing anyone ever said to me. There is a lot of guidance given to get a seat at the table. It does not matter what you do with a seat at the table unless you are actually participating in the conversation. And so don't see your job as context and just getting there and being in the room where it happens. See your job as adding actual value and driving the conversation forward.
Love that. Next question. If your team gave you a superpower nickname, what would it be?
Oh God, I thought it was superpower, not nickname. I feel like it's my peripheral vision. Can you help me come up with that as a nickname? I am like the context queen at the company.
What's an animal that can see this way?
That's a good question. I'm thinking of that lizard that has the eyes that are kind of like, I don't know what it's called.
You could just call me Eyes. Eyes can be my superhero nickname.
I know the emoji. It would be like the eye, the
yeah,
the big eyes.
They're jumping up and down most of the time now.
All right, next question. If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
I'm going to leave them de-identified, but there was a company that talked about how they gave all their team members like an upfront compensation change and said, we're going to change your compensation by 20% and we're going to expect 20% more output as a result. And gosh, I wish I could do something like that. Wouldn't it be a fun experiment?
Awesome. Well, last question. If you could think about someone who's like just truly changing the game in HR and the people function, who should we give a spotlight to? Like, who should we have on the show next?
I don't know. Have y'all met Carolyn Cooley yet over at FanDuel?
No.
She's one of those people that like whenever we were at an event, I was so interested in what she was saying that I kind of followed her out of the room and said like, can I buy you coffee sometime? Can I ask you a bunch of questions? And I think she balances sort of what I think human-centered leadership looks like with a ton of business pragmatism in a way that like is very inspiring for me.
We're going to have to reach out to her. We've had on Linda Aiello from DraftKings, so I feel like we have to have somebody from FanDuel.
You got to get some other sports betting representation.
We do, yeah. Okay, final tradition, one word or phrase close. Anything that's coming to your mind as we wrap up this conversation. And it could be one word or it could be a few.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Oh, man.
I'm going to stick with the sports theme. Ever since you said that you're from Cleveland, all I can think of is Believeland.
I am going to, oh my God, this is the first time I've been stumped in a long time on one word close. I'm going to go with It's the Weekend. That's kind of where I started with my good news. And I'm glad it's the weekend. This is the perfect way to send us into the weekend. You're going to leave us with a lot of things to think about and consider. And these conversations are the best part of my week. And so it's just like a perfect way to send me into the weekend. And with that, it's a wrap, Alex. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. You didn't disappoint. All right. Bye.
Bye, Alex. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.